Thank you very much, Jean. So it's now my great pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, who is going to provide some remarks and then join me for a discussion on how to secure Ukraine's path to victory. Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here. Ukraine's fight for its existence is also a fight for peace and dignity in Europe. But it's also about the right to exist as a country and live free from repressions. Sadly, there are too many brave Ukrainians losing their lives every day. There is no sign that the Kremlin has changed its calculus. Although from the start of the full-scale Russian invasion, it has failed to achieve its goals and strategic plans. In fact, much of the opposite has happened. Ukraine has proved to the world it can win this war, with transatlantic family right behind it. The Kremlin, instead of dividing the European Union, has encouraged the European Union to become a geopolitical actor. EU enlargement has had new life breathed into it, and Ukraine is a candidate country. It all has reminded me of a saying by Estonia's former president, Lennart Meri. Europe is not a geography. Europe is a unity of principles and loyalty to these principles. Principles shape geography. Geography does not shape principles. End of quote. This is the reality that Putin has never understood. This is the reality he's trying to change. Russia tried to blackmail NATO away from its neighborhood. The outcome was the opposite. With Finland in NATO, Russia's borders with NATO has doubled. The Nordics' long tradition of military non-alignment has ended with Sweden with one foot in NATO. Danes voted at the referendum for a closer security integration with the European Union, ending Denmark's EU opt-out from security and defense policy. These are decisions driven by historic and sharp shifts in public opinion. These are decisions by the people. We have witnessed democracy in action in its truest form. But these democracies also need to be protected and cared for. Throughout history, democracy has always been under attack. History has seen authoritarians destroy democracies, often by destroying individual rights and excusing it with protecting national security and economy. Even in established democracies, there can be elected leaders who erode the balance of power and democratic institutions. This way, democracies can die slowly from within. For the Kremlin, democratic governance in Europe is a threat that tries to destroy. It sees liberal democracy as its biggest enemy. Much of the free world is now inevitably focused on conventional war against Ukraine, and rightly so. The aggressor must be defeated on the battlefield. But Russia is also waging a war against our democracies, an energy war, information war, a cyber war. Democracies need to take steps to defend themselves in all of these areas, as well as holding in line to defend a world where rules still apply and where technology works for, not against, democratic societies. We in Estonia, in the front line of democracy, have long been aware of Russia's hybrid attacks. Many of their tactics are taken straight from the KGB playbook. They try to influence political and social choices and undermine trust within free societies. And not only within, but also between our societies. One of Russia's long-term goals is also to divide us as allies. In light of all this, what should the democratic nations really do? There will be important elections in quite many democracies in the near future, so countries must be extra vigilant against any potential threats. The most important thing is to be aware and prepared. Part of this is discussing these issues openly. In the field of cybersecurity, we must all be prepared for cyber warfare to continue even after the conventional war ends in Ukraine, and invest appropriately. We need to have well-protected digital infrastructure in place, and here Ukraine has a lesson to teach all of us. Its digital backbone has enabled the state to keep delivering services online during the war. Many Russian cyber attacks have failed because Ukraine had spent years in preparing for it. Ladies and gentlemen, this all illustrates that Russian colonialism, its war against Ukraine, is also about the possibility of a democratic future. The title of our discussion is Ukraine's Path to Victory. So how to end this war? What are the conditions for victory and for peace in Europe that also lasts? My answer is short. The faster Putin understands that he has made a mistake, he will not reach its objectives and won't be able to break Ukrainians, the sooner this war ends. The longer answer, for victory, there are several conditions and policies we need to pursue. First, freedom must be armed better than tyranny. This is the call by President Zelensky, and this should be also our motto. It means that the number one focus should be arms, ammunition, and training. They all must continue at the scale sufficient for Ukraine to win this war. However, it's not only the battlefield success that will decide the outcome of the war. We have to show Kremlin it cannot outlast Ukraine and the free world economically. So Ukraine's win also depends on our ability to dry up Kremlin's war machine and income to finance its aggression. And we also need to believe in Ukraine. This is an important precondition for any help and assistance needed for actual victory. For peace that lasts in Europe, we need accountability. Without accountability, Russia's cycle of violence will never stop. First, on political accountability. The Russian political elite has learned over the decades that Russia will not be held accountable. In the free world, principles were exchanged for cash, truth for gas. The Kremlin learned that there are always people in the democracies who advocate for their cause. They have been strategic in planting political and economical corruption within democratic institutions and leaders. They have been smart in creating economic dependencies that serve Kremlin's military interests. And the aggressor's confidence only grows. We also need judicial accountability. Without accountability, Russia's cycle of violence will never stop. The arrest warrants issued against Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova by the International Criminal Court are strong statements that all atrocities against Ukraine stem from the criminal policy of its leaders. But it's not just Putin's war. The Russian people also have responsibility. As long as territorial expansion is considered to be a virtue in Russia and human lives lost are its acceptable side effect, Russia's aggressions will sooner or later return, and there can be no lasting peace in Europe. Recognizing national guilt and taking personal responsibility for it is the basis for a society to have a future. It is also basis for breaking Russia's cycle of violence and aggression. We are all reading Russian history these days, reading for trying to make sense of its crimes and rationale of its killing machine. Russian writer Mikhail Shishkin gives his explanation, and I quote, "In Russia, there has been no real de-Stalinization, acceptance of guilt in relation to the past crimes committed. There have been no Nuremberg trials for Communist Party. Without regret and acceptance of national guilt, a democratic new beginning in Russia is not possible." End of quote. Hence, no impunity for war crimes must remain cornerstone of our long-term policies. No one is immune, not even the sitting head of permanent member state of a UN Security Council. Until that is not the case, we should prepare for the worst. Stopping aggressor has its cost. Life next to a pariah state has a cost. Hence, we need to strengthen our own defense and security and adapt accordingly. We in NATO need to undergo changes in our planning, in our defense budgets, and capabilities. Peace and stability in Europe is secured by a geopolitical European Union and by NATO that is able to defend Europe militarily. We also need to end gray zones in Europe. Gray zones fuel conflicts and invite dictators to invade. It has become clear that for peace in Europe, we need Ukraine in NATO and the European Union. Even Mr. Kissinger has changed his opinion, and I quote, "Before this war, I was opposed to the membership of Ukraine in NATO because I feared it would start exactly the process we are seeing now. But now, the idea of neutral Ukraine in these conditions is no longer meaningful." Ladies and gentlemen, our international approach to Russia must remain firm and long-term. We should not believe in the goodwill of an outright aggressor and war criminal. There should be no interpreting of Russia via democratic lens. There should be no room for wishful thinking. Russia is a pariah state that needs to be isolated. There is no room for appeasement and forgiveness. No flirtation with business as usual and lifting sanctions. Half-baked solutions are dangerous. Our joint pressure against Russia must increase, not decrease. It is true we all want this aggression to stop, but stopping aggression temporarily will only postpone next ones. Leaders have a key role in explaining it to their home audiences. And hereby, I don't only mean political leaders. I speak to all of those who are able to influence and shape public opinion by their views, their words, and their actions. We all carry responsibility to make sure that democratic values form the basis of our world order. Responsibility to explain to our home audiences what is globally at stake in Ukraine, why we need to increase pressure on Russia and continue long-term military assistance to Ukraine. We have a responsibility to explain how Ukraine's fight for its existence is also the fight for freedom and dignity in Europe, and how Russia's aggression inevitably carries a cost on our own societies. The cost we pay in euros, but Ukrainians pay in blood. Ladies and gentlemen, all these strands of work need to continue for the long term. We must not raise false expectations and false hopes, and not feed wishful thinking if we would live through a bad dream that will end overnight. In conclusion, our primary focus should be on making sure that aggression ends in defeat, and we are prepared to deter to stop its continuation or expansion in the future. Any negotiated pause serves Kremlin's interest, so it can use the time to rebuild and also prepare its forces for future aggressions. For Ukraine's victory, we need courage, which means also the courage to take risks. It is said, the secret to happiness is freedom. The secret to freedom is courage. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, Prime Minister. I want to ask you, because I live in Brussels and I see the discussion that goes on around support for Ukraine, how long do you think Europe, as a united Europe, can continue to support Ukraine's struggle?
As long as it takes, we should be there. I mean, I have experience from the time when I was a member of European Parliament, and then Russia attacked Crimea, and I saw how, you know, within months this unity was all over. We were not unified on the European level, and hence I made a mental note that we are all democracies, which means that in order to influence the decisions that the leaders are making, you have to convince their public opinion, and we have to work with the people in different countries. For us, it was very black and white. Even when Crimea was attacked, what is going on here and how we should proceed. But it's not that clear for everybody because we have different history. I mean, during the Cold War, we knew what was happening, or actually sort of knew your history and envied what was going on one side of the Iron Curtain, whereas majority of Europe didn't really miss us, and we were suffering a great deal. So we have to learn about each other more, and we have to be stronger together. And I have to say that now the war has been going on for over a year. I mean, the full-scale aggression, and we have been able to stick together, and we have been able to support Ukraine. And we just heard the big decisions by Germany, by France. It is very important to get these signals, because why? As I said in my speech, the war will end when Russia understands it was a mistake, and what they need, like they did in Afghanistan when they withdraw after 10 years, they can't win. And as long as we are behind and showing that we are behind Ukraine, then this is, you know, massive strength that we have all together, and we have to give a signal to Russia that you can't win and you can't break the will of the Ukrainians either.
You're in these European councils. You know what the discussion is between the leaders of the EU27. If, for example, the upcoming or maybe happening now counteroffensive goes badly, do you think that could lead to a dissipation in the support? I mean, we already see some countries mention, you know, we have to have guarantees for Russia. We have to think of Russia's feelings. What do you think, if, let's say, hypothetically, and you're right, I think, to mention Afghanistan, but as you said, 10 years it took for Russia to...
Yeah, but if you think that this all started already 2014, so we are almost 10 years. Almost 10 years. But it is, I mean, that's why I say that we can't raise false expectations. And if you push up the expectation that, okay, now is the summer offensive, and when we do this, then we draw the line and say, okay, we did enough. Why I say that all these temporary solutions actually bring more conflict. And every next time Russia is bolder, every next time they test something new. I mean, in Crimea or in Georgia or before, they were ashamed that it's actually Russian soldiers, because you have the UN Charter that says that you can't attack another country. But
little green men.
Yeah, but then it's like, oh, it's little green men. But then everybody understood it's the Russians. and nothing happened to them. So what they learned is like, okay, we can't do this because nothing happens to us. And that's why the accountability is of utmost importance. And why I say this is that if you know, they get off the hook now, we have a temporary pause, you know, they gather their act again, then next time we see even much bolder steps, which is, I would say, also questioning NATO.
I have a question about China. Do you really think that Beijing could be a peacemaker in Ukraine?
China is a member of the UN Security Council, and if you think about the UN Charter, then it should be also very dear to China, that you know, you can't attack another country. There is one aggressor and one victim in here, and making it all blurry is not in anybody's interest. But I think you know, of course, it could be better to have China on our side, and we have to work on that so that they clearly see the picture the way that we do.
Well, good luck on getting China on our side. Well, thank you so much, Prime Minister. I'd like to welcome Jean back to chair the next discussion on accountability for Russia's atrocities. But thank you so much.
Thank you.